Wanted that to be my career, I would have become a proctologist, not a soda jerk.
What?
I don't even know anymore. We're both finding out what I'm saying at the same time at this point.
Well, anyways, thank you to everyone who has the pleasure of joining us today on the Criminally Mental Podcast. My name is Kody Green.
I am the Big Wet, also known as Zachary Galloway, and here to introduce our show is the friend of our show and our personal friend, the host of the VT Network, Deadman.
Welcome to the Criminally Mental Podcast, where we talk about mental health and the criminal justice system, with your two hosts, Kody Green and Zac Galloway, currently both on parole and compassionate release. Now, here's the show.
So here's an actual real fun fact for you guys. Deadman, the guy who does the voice introductions for our show, his podcast was the first podcast that I was ever on.
Oh, I thought that was going to be a fake fact, like usual. Like that's an actual fact.
No, that's a real fact. The first show I was ever invited to was his show, and I enjoyed that a lot of it. But yeah, so that's a little fact for you.
That really caught me off guard. I didn't even know how to respond because it's so rare that you say actual things that are true.
What if that's the lie?
That's the one lie, and I was just tricked. You guys are both playing me. Like you were never actually on. I never watched the full episode, so I don't know if it even happened.
Playing you like a fiddle, double teaming you like a truck stop hooker.
What?
What, you never heard that phrase?
I can't say that I have, Zach, and the fact that you have terrifies me a little bit.
I'm pretty sure that's like from the Bible, isn't it?
Oh my god! Hey, can we not get us canceled right before we're about to hit 100,000 streams of our show?
Speaking of canceled, how much shit have you almost been canceled for this week?
Oh my gosh! Well, there was the viral video, which like of course always the stupid videos go viral. I had the viral video where I was like playing a prank on my wife, and I said I wasn't going to tuck her in. Oh, canceled for that one. I got canceled, or people are trying to cancel me now because I sent you a Venmo payment because you were like fundraising to get a new hat and stuff. So I sent you a Venmo payment, and I put the title as a joke, which some people did not enjoy. I forgot that that's public and anyone can see it. I thought it was just going to be me and you that could see it. So
the funniest thing about that is like the amount of people who get offended for me during our interaction is so I mean, like, 'cause it raises two questions for me. Like, one, in your mind, am I the guy that you need to stick up for? And two, who thinks gay conversion therapy costs $20?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, that's what I put in the headline of the payment I sent Zach. I said, I sent him $20 and I was like, this is for gay conversion camp. I think I said,
which actually, I think gay conversion camp might be the other way around.
Maybe
I think it's straight conversion that you send people. I think gay conversion camp is just a Lady Gaga concert.
Maybe it could be.
I'm pretty sure that's what that is.
But yeah, so we had some fun with that. But today, do you know what today is, Zach?
Yes.
Do you?
No.
Today is Schizophrenia Awareness Day.
Woo! Woo!
And you know what's funny? You should know that because I told you earlier today.
Did you?
Yeah, remember when I told you last week, actually, that Cecilia was going to be our guest, and I told you it was because it was Schizophrenia Awareness Day today.
Was I wearing pants when you told me? Because I don't hear well when I'm not wearing pants.
Yeah, probably not. I don't know. I can't usually see that. It's usually just torso up, but like maybe. I don't know. We should probably ask your fiance, but I'm guessing you probably were not.
That's a fair guess. And fun fact to the audience out there, 90% of the time I'm not wearing pants. And the other 10% of the time, you wish I was.
What?
I don't even know.
But seriously, with Mental Health Awareness Month going on, we've been doing a lot of really cool episodes. We've been able to talk to Dr. Kojo. We had CC on. We had, who was the first person this month?
Was it Sean Penn?
No, it was not Sean Penn. Anyways, we've been really trying to keep that focus around mental health. I think next week, just to even it back out, we'll have to go back to some of our prison content, some of that, but we did really want to focus on mental health specifically this month and this week.
And that's a good point to bring up to you guys. Next month, we're going to be kicking off a lot of prison sort of content. We're going to be interviewing a lot of people involved with the justice system. I did get a hold of a police officer who was so not excited about being on the show. I mean, that was just a blatant no. Finally got one to respond to me, but he's just like, no.
Yeah, we have some trouble getting cops and stuff like that onto the show. You know what I've been having trouble with, actually?
Urination.
No, not urination. I've been having trouble getting people that work actively in psych wards. I think it'd be really cool to have someone who works actively in a psych ward come on the show.
I think part of the issue that we're running in with both of those fields, getting a police officer on the show and getting someone who's actively working in psych field, is there's a lot of like stipulations that are put on them by their job, and like the cop that I did talk to, I made it very clear that like we're not going to put your department. You're not speaking for your department. You're basically just a faceless police officer who we're interviewing. But I think that's kind of what we're running into with some of these issues.
Yeah, I think we need to, with those types of positions, we might have to have some pre-written questions, because I think they're always nervous that we're going to ask them specific client information or information about like the finite details of their jobs that they can't tell. So maybe that's something we need to work on. But just a shout out to anyone out there listening. If you know a police officer or someone who is a mental health professional at a psych ward, anything like that, we would really be interested in bringing on people from that side as well. It is a challenging thing, and I understand people are skeptical, but we will be as professional as we possibly can.
And on that note, like one of the benefits of this job that we do is we get to talk to a lot of different people with a lot of different opinions. We haven't agreed with everybody that's been on our show.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've been respectful and friendly and conversed with everyone, but one of our main goals doing this show was to bring in people from either other opinions or we don't want an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And the last thing we want, especially with the fan base, is just the same opinion echoed over and over again, because then nobody's thinking. So we really do want to get somebody from either law enforcement who is actively a cop or has retired, and preferably someone who will not be a bitch about it, I guess is the technical
way. I do want someone who's going to allow us to still have the fun we always do.
Right.
So like you said, it is going to be something where I want a different opinion. I want someone to come in here and tell us why they, believe what they believe, why they do what they do. Because as two mentally ill felons with right. A past of addiction, we do have, relatively the same beliefs and opinions. So it is nice to mix that up a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we'll be focusing on next month. But as you mentioned earlier, it is Schizophrenia Awareness Day. We have a great creator that we're going to have here on our show in just a minute. Kody, what's being Schizophrenia Awareness Day? I just wanted to ask you, what is one thing you'd kind of like to educate people on with schizophrenia? What is the one subject that kind of grinds your gears that is either a myth or a misconception about schizophrenia that you'd like to educate on?
That's a super great question. And I think we should also ask Cecilia, but if I'm going to give my opinion, I think what I try to focus on the most, obviously, is how the media and movies portray schizophrenia. You see a lot of schizophrenic people that are violent, that are, scary, dangerous in some way. When the studies have shown that it's really not that accurate. Most people with schizophrenia tend to be more likely to be the victim of violent crimes than to commit violent crimes. And they're way, way more likely to cause harm to themselves rather than others. So that's like my big thing, is trying to, even though you always see dangerous people with schizophrenia in the media, that's because that's all they really show you of schizophrenic people in the media. So
I think I mean, we've kind of discussed that before, but if there's one thing that we really want to use this platform for, I feel, other than just education, is kind of dispelling myths about both the prison system and mental health. So we're going to take the opportunity to discuss schizophrenia in its entirety today. Absolutely. Do you want to maybe introduce our fantastic guest, Kody Green?
I would absolutely love to. So Cecilia is a personal friend of mine. I am so happy and lucky to be able to call her a friend of mine.
Oh my
Cecilia,
God. Cut it out. Jesus, I get it.
Cecilia was one of the other people that was interviewed when Anthony Padilla did his video about schizophrenia. She was another advocate that was interviewed. She's been doing mental health advocacy specifically about psychosis and schizophrenia for a long time. She is, I believe, the founder of Students with Psychosis, which is down below here. I did put their Instagram on there, and she's just done a lot of really cool things. She's someone that I really respect in the schizophrenia awareness advocacy area. Obviously, her and Michelle Hammer are people that I really, really looked up to when I started doing this. So is that enough an intro, or would you like me to keep going, Zac?
I don't know. You want to ask her to prom, you fucking son?
But seriously, we're going to bring on Cecilia now. Thanks again so much for being here. Cecilia, how are you doing today?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Cecilia, thank you for being on the show. Obviously, you probably just heard my partner kind of has a hard on for your content. He's been a fan for a while, and that's awesome. Why don't you introduce yourself to some of our followers here, like who you are, what do you do, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so my name is Cecilia McGow, and I am a radio astronomer. I am an activist. I am the founder and executive director of the nonprofit Students with Psychosis, and I happen to be someone who lives with schizophrenia.
Wow. Okay. So you basically a lot of mental health sort of coverage. How'd you get started with that? Is obviously probably with your own diagnosis of schizophrenia, but how'd you kind of move into activism?
Yeah. So a little bit about my story. As someone living with schizophrenia, I was a student at Penn State, and unfortunately, I wasn't open about my diagnosis for a very long time. And until my second psych ward stay, and that was because the police were involved. Pretty much the night before, I was struggling with some symptoms, and I went to the ER, and I stayed there overnight, and the doctor said it was okay for me to go home, okay to come back to the dorm. And when I came back, not only was I greeted by my roommates, the RA, and a can't help person, it also then brought police officers in full uniform into my dorm room. They patted me down, had to convince them not to put handcuffs on me, and then they escorted me into a marked police car next to our dining commons. So pretty much after that, people knew something was up, and I had to set the story straight. I'm not at all regretting being open with my schizophrenia, but I do wish that I had the choice on when and how to open up. That's what really was a catalyst for my advocacy.
It's unfortunate, but we hear kind of this story a lot on this show. People who were basically forcibly outed with whatever mental health illness or situation they had, and that's just an insanely personal and traumatic thing to go through.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate because I know Michelle has a pretty similar story where, like, I know her first like real brush was with, and she told the story here on the podcast of her.
It was the same, right? It was a college situation, right?
Yeah, so yeah, she was. It was more to do with like her lacrosse coach or something had initially brought up, and then they brought them into. They came into their dorm and they were looking for someone who's self-harming, and they basically forced her to show, even though she was like, "It's me," you don't have to see it. And then yeah, so it's a very similar situation where she was almost forced into, having that diagnosis, being an advocate for it. And so I feel really fortunate. I chose to start making TikToks about it. And just so you know, Cecilia, I do not take that for granted. I do recognize that a lot of people don't get that choice. So thank you for doing it, even though it's something that you were kind of forced into doing.
I appreciate those kind words there.
Well, I'm sorry, Cecilia. We should have discussed this backstage. There is a rule on our show. It is the one rule. You shut up, Kody. The one rule on the show is that you cannot be overly nice to Kody Green.
Okay, all right. I'll
It's
be more
actually
abrasive.
it's actually in our contract with Manscaped, our sponsor, that guests are not allowed to be too kind. So please do keep that in mind. Kody Green is a piece of human trash. You're a great creator. Continue.
I'm sorry. When was that in the Manscaped contract? That
You didn't read the contract, so you don't know.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough.
No, I think that is kind of just to echo what was said. A lot of people, it seems, fall into activism almost out of necessity because they've spent so many years having to be their own advocate, having to speak up, about their own problems. And I think it's almost like you get conditioned so long to not having people listen to you that you're used to having everything be a fight. You're used to having just your base opinion and feelings not heard. So I think a lot of people who eventually do end up in activism, especially with mental health, come from that background. And, it's unfortunate, but coming from that background does seem to make a lot of people very effective in the area of activism.
And so we did get a question on here because you do have SWP in your name there. Can you just talk about Students with Psychosis for a second and, why you started it and what they do?
Yeah, so SWP stands for Students with Psychosis. It's a nonprofit that empowers students and advocates worldwide through community building and collaboration. Oh no, I'll tell the people I'm recording.
I'm actually glad somebody asked what SWP was because I was wondering that too. So, but anyway,
still working from home, so just had to let them know it's on a live stream. But Students with Psychosis is a nonprofit that empowers students and advocates worldwide through community building and collaboration. And I founded the nonprofit because I realized a lot of students were falling through the cracks, living with psychosis. A lot of them were dropping out or not getting the accommodations or support at their university. And something that I noticed at the university level was that when mental health was brought up, or if there were awareness campaigns or even mental health clubs on college campuses, they often shied away from talking about schizophrenia and psychosis because it made them feel uncomfortable. And in a way, that made it even more stigmatized. Because when I was going to those different clubs or awareness events, I thought that I was an outsider. I felt othered, and it made me not want to open up even more.
So I have a question for you. Can you kind of go into the definition of the term psychosis? Just because I feel like a lot of people use that word interchangeably incorrectly. So do you think you could kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, before we became Students with Psychosis, we were a college club at Penn State called Students with Schizophrenia. And we rebranded to Students with Psychosis to be more inclusive, because many of our students maybe don't have a diagnosis of schizophrenia specifically. They might have schizoaffective, they might have bipolar, BPD, but have similar symptoms or overlaps such as having hallucinations, delusions, scattered thoughts, struggle with disassociation. So a psychosis is often used to be more inclusive in case someone doesn't have a specific schizophrenia diagnosis.
Okay. So it sounds like the majority of the people that you started out, at least the intent were suffering from schizophrenia, and it's kind of developed into a whole different, just full encompassing mental health field for a lot of your people. That's cool.
That is correct. I remember, oh my gosh, I remember this one time with our New York City club. A student came to us and they didn't quite yet have a diagnosis. So they were experiencing some positive symptoms of psychosis. So they joined our club. They hadn't yet got a diagnosis, and they later got the diagnosis of bipolar. And they were like, "Can I still come to club meetings? Can I still participate?" And we're like, "Oh my God, of course you can. You're still part of the, at the time, SWS family." But so that's why we rebranded, to make sure that message was super loud and clear.
Very cool. So what would you say the overall, obviously you have some sort of a mission statement. Is this just helping students who suffer from psychosis of any kind deal with college life? Is this a program to help with life in general, or just tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, its main focus is community building and collaboration. So with the community building aspect, it's helping students meet fellow peers. A lot of times our students haven't met another person living with psychosis. So it's about finding fellow peers. We do a lot of different activities with them. We have every week we have over 28 hours of facilitated meetings virtually that they can attend. And something that's unique with students with psychosis is that we take an unconventional approach to our executive board. 100% of our executive board are students living with psychosis. And we do that so that we're better reflecting the needs of our community. And I love it. I love going to those, I'm not on the executive board, I'm the executive director. So I love coming into the board meetings and just hearing what the students want. And also they have more energy than I do, to be honest. And I learned so much from them.
So I was going to ask you, Cecilia, I know that when your symptoms developed, from what I've heard in some of your videos, you actually developed symptoms at a much younger age. And I know I've talked about this statistic, but most people with schizophrenia don't develop symptoms until 18 to 25 for men and 25 to 30 for women. So you have a really rare case of, childhood development with the symptoms. How many people do you have joining students with psychosis that are just starting symptoms? Because I know that's like the typical age for people. I know my psychotic break was actually my first year of college is when I started having schizophrenic symptoms, and I had to drop out of school because, like you said, I live in the Midwest in a very rural area. There was no college clubs. There wasn't even like mental health meetings or support groups I could really go to. So like, how much do you see of people that are like just getting their development?
That's a really good question. And I agree with you. Yeah, that is the peak age to have a schizophrenic break if you're a male. And that's part of the reason why our target audience is college students, because a lot of our students are experiencing these things for the very first time. And I don't know about you, but when it comes to my story, I did start experiencing symptoms younger as a child, where I saw like shadowy figures, whispers in my ears. But it did become more of my junior, senior year of high school where my symptoms became much more pronounced. And it just sort of snowballed into college. So I don't know about you, but at least for me, I was an awkward freshman. I was a little nerd. I was studying astronomy, astrophysics. I did not want to open up to my new roommates that like, hey, I hallucinate a clown and a girl with a knife, like that's not like the icebreaker questions you want to like do. So a part of the reason why we do what we do is so that students can have their peers to talk about this stuff with and sort of normalize the conversation. So a lot of our students are experiencing these things for the first time, but also we have quite a lot of students like myself that have experienced these symptoms for pretty much as long as they remember.
I think one of the really amazing and beneficial things to living in the time that we do is how connected we all can be from different points of across the globe. 10 years ago, it would have been like you said, if you're suffering from schizophrenia, or like Kody mentioned, and you're from a small town, you could be the only person in that town suffering from schizophrenia. You may never get the opportunity to speak to someone who's going through the same issue as you. And I mean, God forbid you actually talk to Kody Green. That would
be horrendous.
But I think it's great that there's a community being built. I mean, obviously you have one that's doing very well, but I feel like we will be able to remove a lot of the stigma and a lot of the misconceptions with schizophrenia the more open and the more we talk about it, which seems stupid to say because of course, but I just think it's that simple. I think if we have more people who are suffering from it talking with each other and communicate, and possibly more important, people like me who I don't suffer from schizophrenia. I have anxiety and an ass that won't quit. Those are my disabilities. But I don't have a lot of education on the subject. Before I started working with I had really no I had some exposure to it because I was locked up with someone, but outside of that, it was totally new to me.
Well, I appreciate you taking like the time to also like learn more about schizophrenia, specifically since it doesn't like directly affect you. So thank you so much for learning more.
Well, it's, I mean, you're welcome. I think for me, it was kind of a weird thing, to be honest. A little personal admission here. I never really had much of an interest in psychosis, schizophrenia, or anything like that. And then I met Kody, and no, this isn't going where you think it is.
Okay,
And
we'll see. We'll see.
He kind of fascinated me quite a bit because I can remember seeing his content when he was going through schizophrenic episodes. And my original thought, like the first time I had no idea who you were, Kody, but the first time you popped up on my For You page, you were going through a schizophrenic episode, and a bad one at that. And my thought was like, holy shit, this poor man, someone needs to take care of him. You know, I mean, like that was my reaction. You know, my reaction was, this guy needs help. And I mean, admittedly you do, but then, you know, the next day I saw your content again, and you were like this very well-spoken, educated individual with this nonprofit. And it occurred to me that in my mind, I couldn't grasp the fact that someone could be schizophrenic and successful. And that was a really humbling moment for me, because I try not to be that guy. You know, like I really try to admit that I have preconceptions or prejudices and work on them. And to realize that me, who I think I'm fairly progressive, was shocked to find out that somebody who had schizophrenia could be that successful was definitely a red flag. And that's kind of what interested me to continue my education with schizophrenia specifically and mental health.
Zac, you just broke your own rule. You told Cecilia you're not supposed to say anything nice about Kody on the podcast.
Cody,
that was all very nice.
Kody, who let you out of the garage?
No, but I do appreciate Zac, and the nice thing about working with Zac, Cecilia, is that he does ask a lot of questions. When we started doing this, I know when we had Michelle Hammer on for the first time, one of the things he asked while she was on was, how do you work well with someone with schizophrenia? And her response was kind of, be patient. You know, there's going to be days where I can't do anything. And, you know, as an advocate and as a very professional person who does a lot of things, there's days where we just can't do anything. I believe we actually, I don't know, I thought we had requested you come on the show before, and I think you ended up having to cancel because of something very similar.
Yep, I have my mental health days, and you can't sometimes plan them. You know, you can't be like, all right, I'm going to have my mental health day this Saturday, you know? Yeah, I was struggling a bit when it came to some symptoms. Sort of have different chapters in my life, even now, even though I've had schizophrenia for a long time, had treatment. Yeah, those rough days, I'm happy to say that they're fewer and farther in between, but I still have them. And I'm still someone that lives with my symptoms. I still hallucinate, and yeah, and I appreciate you guys having, you know, extending the offer again and be accommodating there.
No, and that's exactly what I figured, because I've taken full weeks off of social media before, because you can only do so much. And I had to, me and Zac have both had this conversation. We had to realize, Zac and I, oh my God, I'm sorry. Zac and
my grandma watches the show. It bugs her every time. I get a call from my grandmother every night. Does he not know grammar? So just please, Zac and I.
That's her problem with this show. My grammar and not
among many, but that's
okay.
a big one.
Anyways, Zac and I, what was I even talking about now? You distracted me with the grammar.
You're talking about mental health days?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Zac and I actually had to have a full conversation. We had to skip the episode during this like 2-week long break I was having from social media. We actually, for the first time since we started the podcast in December, we didn't do it for 1 week because I needed that time off. And I was like, yeah, I can put aside an hour that day, but I was going through a med change. I was having symptoms on and off for a week and a half, and I just didn't feel up to it. And Zac was really good about understanding that, working with me. And so we put it off for a week. We came back the next week, bigger and better than ever. Well,
bigger. But something that I feel is kind of additionally a misconception with people who don't suffer from any mental illness, when they hear the phrase mental health day, when someone says I'm taking a mental health day, I think that the image of like somebody with their feet up on the couch, like with the mojito, watching a movie is what they picture. But, you know, when people suffer from schizophrenia or any mental issue that is that debilitating, a mental health day usually looks more like them curled up into a corner trying to make the voices stop.
Yeah.
And it's hard for somebody who's neurotypical to wrap their mind around that. It's hard for anybody who's neurotypical to wrap their mind around, I can't do this because something's not right up here. You know, it's hard to cross that bridge. But once you kind of can click with that this is something that needs to happen, they need that time, they need to recover, you know, it's a lot easier to work with.
I was going to ask you, Cecilia, so you've been doing more, like I'm just now starting to get back into motivational speaking. I was doing it before Corona. I did a few events and then Corona hit and I was like, well, awesome timing for that to take off. And so now I have booked a few live events coming up this year. Have you ever had, because I know you do a lot of speaking and advocacy in that way. Have you ever had an issue where like you had symptoms while doing one of these advocacy events? Because I'm so petrified of that to the point where like I don't want to schedule every single weekend because I'm afraid if I do it so often, it's only a matter of time until it happens.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I hear you there. Yeah. There have been different chapters in my life where I would be having guest speaking gigs like back to back, and like the flying and stuff would affect like my sleep schedule. When my sleep schedule is when that's messed up, then that's like, all right, then the mental health gets usually messed up as well.
Yep.
Something that I like to do when I travel, and it's actually part of my contract, is that I always bring a fellow advocate along with me. Part of that is I like to make sure that another advocate is speaking as well, so that they are also getting a platform. But also selfishly, I like a travel buddy, and I also struggle about getting out of bed, especially if my mental health is a struggle. So I like having a fellow peer there that gets it. You know what I mean? It gets it, and also like knock on my hotel room if I'm having a hard time getting up. So yeah, guest speaking can be difficult. Also, I struggle sometimes with word salad. And being a speaker, that's difficult when you have a condition that affects your speech. And the frustration that I've seen there is that oftentimes in the society we have today, people judge people on their perceived intelligence, on how they're communicating. And let me just say, as someone who can sometimes articulate their thought, other times my words are just everywhere. It's frustrating when my words are everywhere, how often individuals dismiss me or dismiss my thoughts just because I'm not able to articulate it. And the message I want to get through there is that even if someone is having a difficult time articulating their thoughts, it doesn't at all lessen the value of the message they're trying to get across, and to be patient. Because even if you're a guest speaker and you're someone who struggles with word salad, be patient. If you're the person that's in the audience, listen.
What is that term you keep using? Word salad? Could you explain that?
Yeah, so pretty much think of like one of those salads you get and you put like the dressing in and then you shake it up. That's sort of like what it feels like with like the words and the thoughts inside my head, where it comes out as disjointed. They don't, it might not make very much sense what I'm saying. The sentences or words might be a bit scrambled. So word salad, I also struggle with some scattered thoughts as well.
Zach, just so you understand, you know when I'm having symptoms and I'll say things that make no sense?
Yeah, like, just out of nowhere. Yeah.
That's word salad. It's literally, I'm pretty fortunate. I know some people with schizophrenia will have it kind of constantly just because, you know, the brain can only handle so much. I'm very fortunate where I really only get it when I'm having symptoms, but that's what that is. When I'm having symptoms and I can't get words out, or I get words out and they're not in the order I meant them to be in, or there's words there that were never meant to be there. That's kind of what the word salad is. So you've heard it before.
I definitely recognize it. I mean, with you, especially just working with you for this amount of time, like you have at least like 3 stage of your schizophrenic attack. You know, like when I first noticed you start to like acknowledge people that aren't there, or you look off the camera, that's step 1. 2 is you tell the person to shut up while you're talking to me. Like you'll take a break and you'll like try to hush someone up, but nobody exists. And 3 is usually the word salad part. So that's interesting to know.
It's usually because my brain is getting so overwhelmed. It's just thoughts don't come out. Thoughts are there. I want to get them out, but I cannot communicate them. And so, Cecilia, I don't know if this is something you're talking too much about. I did just see it on Instagram, so I'm sorry if I'm stepping out of line here. But on top of dealing with schizophrenia and like the word salad, you also had a newer diagnosis, right? And I don't want to talk about it if you're not comfortable, but I thought I saw you posted on Instagram about your new diagnosis as well, which if you want to go into it, you can. I don't want to put you on the spot there.
I mean, even though you did definitely just put her on the spot. Yeah.
No, I can go ahead and talk about it. So I'm also I'm autistic as well. So I have schizophrenia and I'm also autistic. It's something that I've known for quite a long time, and my friends have all known that I'm autistic. Like Michelle, she knows that I'm autistic. I just wasn't open about it for a very long time because, well, it's one of those diagnoses that people try to explain people a bit too much with. Like I'm a very passionate person. Like when it comes to like things that I'm interested in, it's like I'm interested in it like 100%. And like when it comes to when I was studying astronomy astrophysics, my focus was pulsar research, and I freaking love pulsars still. And don't get me on a tangent about talking about pulsars because I know this is not the place to do that. But a reason I didn't want to open up about being autistic was, one, also I wasn't ready. Also, I don't owe anyone an explanation about or owe anyone being open about it. And I also didn't want people to undermine the work that I do, because I freaking love working with students. I freaking love pulsars. And I don't want someone to think that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have autism. But the reason why I opened up is because I meet a lot of students that are also autistic and have psychosis, and their needs are not being met. Because when you have overlapping diagnoses, the same coping skills, the same treatments, won't maybe work for another person that doesn't have autism. And I mean, really, there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to treatment for schizophrenia and psychosis. But particularly when it comes to, say, stimming or also like overstimuli as well, it's things that really need to be addressed with a person living with both autism and schizophrenia.
So I think something that oh, sorry, Kody, were you going to say something? Or?
Yeah, 1 second. Just because I wanted to, I don't know if a lot of people here probably haven't looked into this research, but Zac actually knows someone from his time in prison that was both schizophrenic and autistic. And I just wanted to give a statistic here. And that is that prevalence for schizophrenia may be 3-fold higher in people with autism. So it's actually much more likely for people with autism to develop schizophrenia than the general population. So there is actually a connection there that is like a lot of people that suffer from schizophrenia also have a diagnosis of autism. So that was just something I started researching when I saw your Instagram post, Cecilia, because I know I have personally met a few people that have both diagnoses. Zac, one of the people he talks about in his story times, had both schizophrenia and autism as well.
And I think you mentioned a little bit before you were kind of worried about maybe some of the stigma with autism. And one of our first guests on the show was a man with autism, TriPie. Shout out to Brandon. Love you, man. Watch back on the show. But I think you're falling victim to a trend in a way. I mean, I don't know how else to say this, but we've all been on TikTok or social media, and people are kind of doing like what they did back in 2012 Tumblr era, where they're taking like mental diagnoses and self-diagnosing and then pretty much excusing whatever behavior or whatever on it. I mean, we kind of do run into a lot of that. And I think there's a lot of misrepresentation with what autism actually is and what autism actually isn't. Like, your friend having a hyperfixation on something, yeah, it could be a sign of them being autistic. Maybe they just like football. So, I mean, I can definitely understand your hesitance with coming out with that sort of thing.
Well, sorry, just one last thing, Cecilia, is I know that I had struggled coming out just talking about schizophrenia. And when you talk about stigmatized illnesses, those have got to be just on the top. Autism and schizophrenia are just on the top of very stigmatized, misunderstood illnesses. So I couldn't imagine having to share both. I struggle enough on some days just talking about my schizophrenia. I couldn't imagine also having to talk actively, about struggling with two different conditions that are very stigmatized.
I hear you there. And this is actually the first recording of talking about having autism. So thank you for helping give a platform to talking about having those dual diagnoses.
Well, as Kody mentioned before, we didn't want to pry on the issue because you just kind of started talking about it, but it's so important, especially for people like you who have started this organization, who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and yet are so successful, and you're doing so well. I'm sure you have bad days. I'm sure you have your issues. We all do. But the fact remains is you're a very strong individual by any standards, doing what you do, and then adding that very somewhat common diagnosis to it, I think is going to give a lot of hope to people. I think a lot of people see creators like you, and if they're struggling with their diagnosis, about telling other people, it really gives them that hope, that foot up, that yeah, I may be like this, but so is this person.
I appreciate you saying this. And I really do hope that, especially when it comes to the students that I work with, that the advocacy will help them be more open, or at least seek out the help sooner. Because I know for me, when it comes to my treatment journey, I mean, I'm one of these people that I don't like the saying live life with no regrets, because I think that you all have regrets and stuff. There are things that I regret. A regret that I do have when it comes to my treatment journey is not getting the help sooner, or not reaching out to a friend or talking about it sooner. So that's a hope when it comes to my advocacy, is that by sharing my story, someone will reach out sooner.
Did you, when you started your advocacy, I know the reason I started was because, like I had mentioned before, I lived in I still do, a very small rural area in the Midwest. There is not a lot of people that I can talk to or even ask this kind of stuff. There's no peer support groups, anything like that. I mostly did it because I thought, even if only one person with schizophrenia found my page and had someone to watch and understand and be able to connect with, that I was doing my job, as an advocate, as a person with schizophrenia. Did you have any of that when you went into? I know you said I know you were kind of forced into it, but early on, did that ever motivate you to keep going?
It definitely did help motivate me, because when I started opening up about my schizophrenia, I was actually surprised about how many people I even knew in my real life that said, "Hey, I actually have schizophrenia." I was just like, "Whoa, wait, what? We've been friends for a while, and we've never had this conversation because we were both struggling so much with self-stigma and not being open about it." So yeah, that is definitely a motivating factor for me. I also grew up in a very small town, about an hour away from Washington, D.C. And when I went to Penn State, yeah, it's a big campus, but it's also a very small town. Pretty much it's just a college town. And when I came here to New York, I live in New York City now, I was able to meet a lot more people who were open about, for example, Michelle Hammer from Schizophrenic NYC. So it wasn't really until I moved to New York City that I started meeting fellow advocates that in person, that were also open about their diagnosis. But also, I just want to add also that moving from a small town in a college town to New York City, as someone who struggles with overstimuli and just a lot of stuff going on, New York was a difficult adjustment.
I was about to say, New York's a hard city to be anybody in, but especially autistic.
Yeah, and something that I found very helpful for me, and some people think this is a little quirky or weird or whatnot, is I love Times Square, because when I first came to New York City, I was kind of scared of Times Square because there's a lot going on. I would oftentimes get very symptomatic there. So I go to Times Square, and this is before COVID, and I would just sit there. And it was sort of like exposure therapy for me there. And I'll go there alone because if I started getting overwhelmed, I would leave. And also a trigger for me is a lot of like if things are red. And oh my goodness, I freaking hate the Elmo in Times Square. Let me just say that. But anyway, so I found at this point now I'm adjusted to New York City, but it was a struggle initially.
You know, it's kind of an interesting point of issue. This entire episode, we've been talking about, you know, being open with diagnoses and mental health. And each one of us has consistently used the term out with their illness, which is, and this isn't just us. Everyone uses this sort of terminology. Why the vernacular for your mental illness should be you're coming out is very odd to me. You know, and I didn't realize how weird it was up until a couple days ago, actually. I got a DM from a follower, and they said that they sympathized with me being a felon and, you know, like feeling like I had to hide stuff because they're schizophrenic and they feel like they can't tell anybody about, you know, what's going on in their life. And it didn't click with me how horrible that is. I have a criminal record because I fucked up and I broke many laws successfully, but nevertheless broke them. This is somebody who has a mental illness of no consequence of their own choices. They didn't wake up and choose this. Their parents didn't wake up and choose this. And yet they're facing the reality of having to choose whether or not they can be honest with who they are on a day-to-day basis. That's fucking terrible to me.
I agree with you there. It's terrible that it is this sort of coming out story if you are open with your diagnosis or an opening up story. I think that also kind of talks about how we can learn a lot from other stigmatized groups or other marginalized groups. For example, the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to opening up or becoming more of showing your authentic self. I think other things that we can learn from the LGBTQ plus community, for example, is language. Something that I love is how the LGBTQ plus community talks about having allies. Earlier on in this podcast, we were talking about like even if someone doesn't have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, learning more about it, helping advocacy with it. Like Zac, I just want to say you're a great ally for people living with schizophrenia. And also another language thing that I think we can learn from the LGBTQ plus community is how people identify as well. For example, when someone lives with a schizophrenia, they might be more comfortable being called a schizophrenic or having a person first language or also having like living with schizophrenia or being identifying as living with psychosis or psychotic or it's very important to ask the person what they feel most comfortable identifying with.
That is a really good point. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually LGBTQ plus, but something that I know it annoys people who aren't either an ally or part of the LGBTQ community, but something that most people, at least within the community, are really cautious as far as what you want me to address or call you or refer to you as. That's very important within our community. And whatever that is, whatever, I'm going to call you that. I don't even need to understand the root of it. But that's something I've tried to carry over into, you know, dealing with mental health. Because there are some people who don't like the term autistic. There are some people who will think schizo is a slur. And it varies from person to person. And I think if we can normalize having an adult conversation about diagnoses the same way that we do about sexuality or about identity, you know, we'd be a lot just better off in general. I mean, if you're comfortable in your own skin, that's wonderful. But there's a whole new feeling when the people who you're surrounding yourself with also are comfortable and supporting with who you are and how you identify yourself.
I cannot agree with you more, and those are important discussions to have. And also when you see someone respecting how you identify, that's also, at least on a personal level, it helps with showing support. And that's a very simple way someone can be showing support is by respecting how you identify.
It's the baseline for all respect. Really, one of the first things you say to someone is, "Hi, this is my name." And something that is a lot more important and a lot more connected than your name is who you are. So if you're coming to someone and you're saying, "Hey, this is who I am," and they're immediately invalidating you, you can't have a relationship with that person. I mean, it just ends there because there's no respect. So I think, especially in terms of mental health, if we can just start that first conversation with just respect and communication, allies and people who are suffering with illness can take advocacy to a whole new level.
I do want to ask Cecilia before we go, because we are getting close to the end of time today. I do want to ask Cecilia what you asked me in the very beginning. Cecilia, what do you think is the most important thing that you want people to understand when it comes to Schizophrenic Awareness Day, and like what specific factors of schizophrenia you would want the general public to understand better?
You totally just bogarted my question that I asked you.
I literally said that I was going to ask her that, and then I started this with, I want to ask her the same question you asked me.
Whatever, Cecilia. Go ahead and answer Cody's question.
The one that comes to mind for me is that we don't fill the stereotype when it comes to people thinking that we're violent. I see this this one frustrates me a lot because it gets in the way of people opening up. People assume that someone with schizophrenia is violent. And I also see this very much brought up both in the media and also in politics, specifically in the gun violence debate, how people with serious mental illness are often scapegoated. But in fact, we're far much more likely to be the abuse victim rather than the abuser. For example, I lived in a homeless abuse shelter for a part of high school. And it's very important that we don't have this misconception because it gets in the way of people opening up. I hear this with students, for example, because when you hear about gun violence, you also hear about the conversation about school shootings. So think about being a student opening up about having schizophrenia in the same conversation as school shootings. So it's very important that we make sure that we're not only having respectful but also accurate conversations about people living with schizophrenia, because it has very real consequences and gets in the way of people reaching out and getting the help that they deserve.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. That's a really great one. And I think, I don't know, like you said, we can't get past the stigma. We can't start having good conversations until people understand that the research doesn't support people with schizophrenia being violent. Obviously, there will always be cases of people with schizophrenia being delusional enough to cause harm to someone, but they are far and few in between. And it's always those ones that are featured on the news and in the media, which creates this idea of the violent schizophrenic. So I do thank you for sharing that, because that's something that actively bothers me a lot. And it's something that I get a lot of comments and questions on my videos. So
additionally, I wanted to ask you this question just because we kind of ask this question that most creators who deal with schizophrenia. As someone who doesn't deal with schizophrenia myself, what advice would you give to someone who doesn't suffer from schizophrenia but works with you or is your friend? Like when you're going into an episode, when you feel symptoms coming on and that sort of thing, I'm sure it's terrifying. I honestly have no comparison for that, but I can't imagine how the additional stress of having to go through an episode, but then also having to kind of take care of the person around you because they don't know what's going on. So like what advice would you give to somebody who is either working with a schizophrenic person, in a relationship with a schizophrenic person, maybe on some godforsaken podcast show with a schizophrenic person? Like, what is the advice you would give them?
If you're seeing someone that is struggling with their symptoms, I would say not to freak out, stay calm. I know for me, I've had a sweatshirt thrown over my head before because I struggle with I sometimes hit my head when I'm having an episode and overreaction. And when people around me are freaking out, it's just going to make me freak out even more. So staying calm, also listening to the person is very important, because even though my hallucinations or delusion, that's not real, the feelings that I'm feeling, such as fear, confusion, frustration, those are real, those are valid. So making sure that you're listening to the person. Also, another suggestion I would have is, if you're working with someone closely or they're your friend, to have that conversation before they're in crisis or before they're symptomatic, because each person is different. So coping skills for them might be different from me. My friends know, turn on the music. I need the music going, full volume if I'm having some symptoms. That's something that helps me. So talking with your friend, having that conversation before they're symptomatic or visibly symptomatic or in crisis, staying calm when they're in crisis, and listening to them and making sure that you're addressing the person first and not just the symptoms.
That's really great advice. And kind of going back to the communication topic, when Kody and I agreed to do the show together, the first question I asked him was, if you're having an episode, what can I do to help you? Or how do I deal with it? That was my first question, because I knowingly had no real tools to deal with the situation. Of course, now having worked with him, like, we pretty much have this down. Now I see his schizophrenia the same way that I see my fiance's cold. It's a part of health. It's just not good today. You'll be better tomorrow. It's one of those things. But I can remember the first time I really saw anybody with schizophrenia, I hadn't had that conversation with them yet. I didn't know what their coping skills were. I didn't know what their triggers were. And had I had the knowledge I had now, I would definitely just suggest to anyone, if you meet somebody who has a diagnosis or any diagnosis of psychosis, don't be afraid to ask them how you can help, especially in a situation where they're having symptoms or having an episode. Become part of their recovery. Be an active part of this person's recovery in that day. Ask them what you can do before the moment of crisis.
But seriously, Cecilia, thank you so much for joining us today. I know I learned a lot. I love listening to you talk, because I think you do bring a lot of knowledge, and I think you're a very, very great advocate for psychosis and schizophrenia. I do appreciate you joining us today and doing it on the World Schizophrenia Awareness Day. I think that was so cool that we were able to line that up.
Yeah, and also a shout out to everyone today for coming out to the show. It is Schizophrenia Awareness Day, and this episode, just like this show, is brought to you by the wonderful people at manscaped.com. Kody, you want to fill them in on what the deals at Manscaped are right now?
Absolutely. So as you guys know, we talk about Manscaped every week. Manscaped sent us some amazing products to review. We got the Lawnmower 2.0 ball deodorant and ball toner, all fantastic products. They really are great products. And when we talk about healthcare, we also need to talk about self-care. So
I like that. Did you just think of that?
I did, right on the spot.
Really?
It's not written down in front of me or anything.
Really? I gotta write that. I like that. Yeah.
But seriously, when it comes to self-care, it is something that I actively really think we made a good choice partnering with them. It's not something I think people expect us to have as our sponsor, but it is a great sponsor. So make sure you guys use 20%, or make sure you guys use our code GALLOWOP to get 20% off and free shipping. Zach, sorry, what? Can you read that code again? I think I mispronounced it.
The code again at manscaped.com to get 20% off and free shipping is GALLOWOP. GALLOWOP. I hate you so much, Kody.
I love you too, Zach. And once again, thank you so much for joining us, Cecilia. Do you have any final words or any last things you want to tell our audience before we go today?
I just want to say thank you so much for having me on this show, and thank you both for the advocacy and the work that you do.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being as brave as you are, taking the steps you are, and making the content you do. We've really enjoyed this time here. Love to have you back on the show sometime.
And
thank you.
Last but not least, Zach, any words for the people before we go?
Stay woke, sheeple.
There it is.